You know what's funny? Most extraction shooters don't actually die because they're bad games. They die because they slowly, quietly push away the exact people they need to survive. And the wild part is we've watched this happen over and over and over and over again. So when people ask me in the comments, will Marathon survive? Or when they say Marathon is dead on arrival, or that the extraction shooter genre is not popular, or it's too saturated, or whatever reason, I sit back and I think that it's not really about Bungie's talent to make the game or the budget behind it. I think it's more about whether Marathon can dodge the same traps that have killed almost every other game in the genre. Extraction shooters are definitely a different type of game. A close friend that I have actually plays them and used the word that I thought was really applicable, and that's that they're cursed. They ask you for time and focus, emotional buy-in, and it makes me think that if they don't give enough back, players don't just rage quit off the game, they stop logging in for good. And I think that's the real danger. Now, looking at other extraction shooter communities, and I see one of the same pitfalls in almost every single one of them, and that's there's always a gap, a massive, unbridgeable gap between people who can play 40 hours a week and the people who play 40 hours a month. And the extraction shooter genre, in my opinion, is built for that first group of people. Saw one post on Reddit that said, I only have so much time to play video games, so I like to play ones that feel like they're rewarding my time investment. I never feel like I can win when I play an extraction shooter. I always feel like I'm going to lose. And I think that that's that wall that casual players hit in these games. You can't just hop on for a quick session in most extraction shooters. You need to know the maps, you need to know the meta loadouts, you need to understand the economy of the game, you need to keep up with patches and wipes. Miss a week, you're behind. Miss a month, you're pretty much done. Now, Arc Raiders seems to be trying to fix a couple of aspects with their no-wipe system and safe pockets for loot. And to me, that kind of says we don't want to really disrespect the player's time investment, but most games in this genre, they absolutely do. And that doesn't mean that Arc Raiders is getting it perfect either. So this is normally how it goes. At launch, everything's great. There's a ton of players. There's full lobbies. You've got a beautiful mix of skill levels between casuals and sweats, new players, all trying to figure out maps and the meta and everything like that. And then a few weeks pass, the casual players start leaving. And it's probably because they don't even hate the game. Maybe they're just tired, they die a lot. There's no feeling of improvement. Every session they have on the game starts to feel like a job to them. And once they start leaving, what happens? The player base starts to skew more towards the hardcore players. Everybody knows the maps. Everyone knows the meta. Everyone is listening for your footsteps from 3 buildings away. Every single fight you get in feels like a tournament final. And then what happens when new players show up? They get absolutely obliterated and then they quit immediately. That's the spiral. And once it starts, it literally almost never reverses. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand when people talk about games are dead, this game's dead. It's really, they might have thousands of players online, but it's so hardcore that they can never grow and have new fans start to play. I look at a game like Hunt Showdown that has been around since 2018. We're now in 2026, and that game has been around for years, where most games are dying within months. And I think that game is considered a massive success. Does it have 100,000 people playing on Steam at one time? No, but the numbers that it does average is healthy in my opinion. Another game that I think back to is the Cycle Frontier, which launched in June of 2022. It had solid gameplay. People actually seemed to really like it. The reviews were good. And within 3 months, it lost over 90% of its player base. And I know I just made a video on why that doesn't really matter, but stay with me. I think that means something in this context because the developers basically admitted in the shutdown announcement that they couldn't solve the population problem fast enough. There were cheaters running rampant, the casual player base was just gone, and new players got farmed quickly by veterans. And by March 2023, they just shut down completely. That's 9 months from launch to closure. Again, once that spiral starts, you can't really beat it. Here's something else I found while researching this topic that honestly surprised me. There are Tarkov forums with multiple threads of grown adults who are talking about being afraid to get into a game. One person wrote, "I have to amp myself up to play. I've wasted countless hours messing around in my stash and hideout, planning on raiding, but always find an excuse before hitting the ready button." Another said they had 7 guns in their stash, all the same, but they were too scared to use any of them. Just think about that. People are grinding for hours to get gear, and then they're too anxious to actually use it. That's not really gear fear. That's the game creating so much psychological pressure that it's not even fun. When a game requires you to literally give yourself a pep talk to start playing, you're gonna lose the majority of people who just want to unwind after work. Going further down that rabbit hole, let's talk about wipes for a second. Tarkov has it. It resets everyone's progress. Every few months, they start fresh, new content stuff. There's a lot of hype around it. That sounds great, right? But players have to grind hard at the start of a wipe. Like, it almost seems unhealthy the amount of hours that people are putting in, because if you don't, you're gonna fall behind, and falling behind in an extraction shooter is basically a death sentence for your enjoyment. People start getting burned out. The grind becomes a chore. Players who achieve their goals kind of just stop playing. People get burned out trying to get this gear, and then they don't want to use it, and then they don't log in. But then they know that there's going to be a wipe happening, and these issues just kind of stack on top of each other. Now, I know everybody likes to blame having gear fear. People quit because they're scared to lose their loadout, and I don't think that's necessarily completely true to me personally, and to other people I've talked to. I think that most players are fine losing their gear as long as they understand why they lost. The problem is when you die instantly, you don't know from where, you don't know what you did wrong, you don't know what you're supposed to take from that death. You're just confused and frustrated, and you've lost your gear. A quote that I saw that I think nailed this was, "It's not fun to be punished for losing, especially when the only reward for winning is obtaining items you will eventually lose anyway." So once you start losing and losing and losing, and there's nothing you can really learn from this, I think that people check out. And once a player feels like they're just a loot farm for some other players, I think they're gone. I think they're quitting the games. Now let's look at Marathon. And Marathon to me makes it seem like it's trying to make extraction shooters accessible. And on paper, that does sound smart, but as we've talked about before on this channel, a game made for everyone is a game made for no one. Looking at Tarkov and all its ammo types, all its different stats, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't even have an in-game map. It kind of just goes against everything that regular game design and philosophy at this point has. It just goes the other way. But Tarkov survives, and I think that it's because it's so complex. I think just learning the game feels like you're almost beating the game. It's so punishing, and you're constantly put at odds that the people who stick with it are just fanatically devoted to the game. And I think maybe Bungie looked at that and said, let's do the exact opposite. And we've all heard about the player test where people from the Tarkov community were like, no, I'm not going to play this game and stuff. I don't like it. And I think that that's a sure sign that what they're doing is the opposite. Simple systems, lower stakes, more accessible. I believe I saw a review that said Marathon's attempt at approachability has resulted in a game that lacks depth. It's trying to be an extraction shooter for people who don't like extraction shooters. And that is worrisome because once you take away all the things that make the genre special, you really end up with something that probably doesn't appeal to anyone. Another issue is cheaters, and I think that they hit extraction shooters way harder than most other games. I think of people who play Call of Duty or Halo or something like that, and you get into a lobby with some loser who is using wall hacks. You either leave the game, you're annoyed, but then you requeue and you start over. But in an extraction shooter, they waste your progress, your time, your loot, your motivation. And I think that once players start thinking that people are cheating, it hurts the game even more because you're constantly like, is that person cheating? I don't want to use my gear. Why bother gearing up if I'm just going to get headshot anyway by somebody using a wall hack? And then that trust is gone. And I think, really, trust is everything in this genre. Again, looking at the cycle, once the player base had dwindled down every time you were killed, you just assumed it was somebody that was cheating. But Marathon is not free to play. There is a $40 price tag to get in, so that will definitely deter cheaters. I think that that's important because you can't just ban cheaters fast enough. I think that players have to go in and think they have this perception that you have prevented cheating from the get-go. Because once everybody starts thinking, oh, I'm just getting headshot by a cheater, you lose people again. Now, obviously, every extraction shooter is not doomed. Hunt Showdown has been running for years again. Arc Raiders, as of now, is doing incredible. Even Tarkov is successful. But there have been so many games that have sprung up and just disappeared over the years. I think that Marathon needs to figure out how it's not just going up against Tarkov or Arc Raiders. It's going up against burnout and genre fatigue. And while I do think that people are skeptical about the game because of Bungie and recent bad press, they're also skeptical because if they've come from the genre, they've been burned before. So many games have promised something and delivered nothing. Anthem, The Division's Dark Zone, Call of Duty's DMZ. Feels like every time a studio says, we're gonna revolutionize this genre, it ends the same way, and it's all this hype, a disappointing launch, and then a death. So while Bungie is saying Marathon is different, and they're showing all these things off that makes it different, players have heard that song before. And to me, Marathon doesn't need to be perfect. I think it just needs to be fair. I think they need to be able to have players learn the systems and feel good about that. But can they pull that off? Now, I know a lot of people are probably thinking, you know, Tarkov's been around for forever and it's fine. And yeah, you're right, sort of. I think that Tarkov has staying power because it doesn't care about being accessible. It's just so aggressively niche. And the people who love it really, really love it. And it was also one of the first extraction shooters out there, so it does have that kind of bias. I think Marathon is not the same as Tarkov at all. Marathon is being made by Bungie, the studio known for Halo and Destiny. Their games have pulled in millions of players. They're not just aiming for the Tarkov audience because that doesn't work for their budget. That whole business model is not going to make enough money. Marathon needs to be more accessible than Tarkov, but it has to keep that same tension that makes extraction shooters feel interesting. But with all that being said, I don't think Marathon is doomed. But I also don't think the hype matters as much as people think it does. If Bungie can keep that casual player base throughout the coming months, keep that ecosystem healthy instead of just top-heavy, Marathon has a shot. But they need to solve the problems that other games in this genre have had. The time investment issue, the population spiral, burnout, perceptions of cheating, power creep. And if they can't, I don't think Marathon will fail in some dramatic shutdown announcement. I just think it'll slowly fade out, a whisper. Players will stop logging in, the game will be empty, and that's how most extraction shooters die. I think the question isn't whether Marathon will be good, it's whether it can keep people playing long enough to find out. That's gonna do it for the video, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like down below. Make sure you sub to the channel if you want more Marathon content. Let me know your thoughts and feelings, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace!